Hey, we're glad that you're with us. Here we are, podcast. I'm with my friend Lenita Weaver. We have this podcast called Asking for a Friend. We try to explore some of life's important questions, have conversations about them, hoping to spark conversations that you might have. So we're going to do our best, do our intelligence best to talk back and forth, but hoping that this might be a useful tool for you as you're doing your own thinking and as you're starting your own conversations. This is my idea, totally my idea, 100% my idea. I wanted to talk to Lenita about women in leadership. I was going to start out with some cheesy line like, you've been a woman for a long time. But maybe it's better just to zone in on women in leadership.
This, yes.
I didn't mean that. I meant more.
But now it's on a podcast and recorded forever.
Right. So here, let's go this way instead. When did women in leadership become important to you? Like, what's the story for you? You are a compelling leader, and you've been a leader in a number of different contexts, including here, the church, where you are one of two pastors. But when did this become important?
It's been a lifelong journey realizing that this is actually something that's important to me. So maybe I'll just talk about two kind of points where it surfaced for me. One was when I was working in international relief and development. So as a young woman growing up in the 80s, I had a strong faith, but I realized that if I wanted to combine my faith and my work, which I did, I couldn't do that inside the church. So just were not avenues for me. So I went into international relief and development as a career option and ended up working largely with faith-based organizations. And while I was there, I started to bump into situations that I could see that my male colleagues were not, expectations of me that just men didn't carry. One incident, I just will always remember this. I was at a conference with my CEO, and I was there representing our organization. We were exploring some funding options, and I was there to meet a project manager to help them talk through what options we could pursue for funding with them. And this project manager was a male. And I remember us sitting down together, and he looked at my CEO and he said, well, why don't you and I chat while Lenita goes and gets us the coffee? And that was shocking in and of itself. But what was extra shocking was my CEO's response. It was so good. He said, I'll go get the coffee and you stay here and chat with Lenita because that's who you need to talk to.
Oh, I love it.
And I just love that picture of this man realizing this is someone who needs to lead, and I can create space for them to do that. So that was one incident that became really formative for me. And then another...
Almost teary.
Yeah.
Almost
teary.
Okay.
I do. I remember that so well, and I will respect him forever for that story. But then also later on, I was a young mom and kind of questioning, what am I doing? I was homeschooling my girls at the time, and yet I had this interest in being a part of organizations, and I started to meet with a group of about 5 women, super competent leaders. And I remember walking into the room, my friend Sharon had invited me into this and just feeling so intimidated. What am I doing here? I'm not a leader. And those women kind of surrounded me. We surrounded each other and called leadership gifts out in one another, not by focusing so much on leadership, but just by being friends. For one another and praying together and talking about how our faith intersected with our work and with our families. And that group of women really changed it's been the last 10 years of my life. They were so formative, and they made me think about what does propel women into leadership? What are the supports that are needed? What forms them? So those might be two of the things that have been most formative as I think about it.
Neat. Thanks for those stories. Those are good. So you've recently completed your PhD, Dr. Paisley Weber. And if I have it straight, you did a dissertation that was around best practices for supporting women in leadership. So I know the way that dissertations can be, can you explain the substance of your dissertation to someone like me who would need some help understanding stuff
Yeah.
like that. And then where does it go? Like, how does this move forward and do,
Right.
I think, what you intend for it to do?
So my dissertation topic was based on two premises, research indicators. This is well researched. That one is that organizations are better when men and women lead together. Across any indicator, when you have teams of men and women leading together, diverse teams, organizations do better. So how do we help organizations have gender equity at the leadership level? That was one question. But then we still have barriers for women becoming leaders. And this is across all sectors, corporate, academic, medical, and then, of course, nonprofit and Christian organizations. What we find is that in many Christian organizations, those barriers are actually amplified because of a theology that we have that distinguishes male and female roles and says that men lead, women don't. And so in many Christian contexts, those barriers that are already there for many women are much stronger. And so I was curious to know, well, what supports work best to help women lead in Christian organizations? And we've had a lot of research around training that can help, but what was emerging that was really interesting for me and connected with my own experience is that when women have networks of friends and mentors and sponsors and colleagues around them, they are actually able to enter leadership and be sustained there. And so I wanted to look at what do those networks look like. So the short version of my research findings is that nothing worked out the way I thought it would, but it was still super interesting. The networks really matter. I had thought maybe, because we hear this all the time, that women who had larger networks that were more diverse, like in that they would have higher level male leaders in their networks, that they would be able to identify as leaders more readily. But that actually wasn't borne out. What was interesting is that it was the network size didn't really matter, but it was the number of close relationships that they had that seemed to make a difference. And for sure, women who had access to what we call career support. So if they were getting support from someone who was like a sponsor who was opening doors for them, or if they had access to a mentor, then yes, they would be able to identify themselves as leaders. They would be in that leadership journey. But what was super interesting was that it was like they first needed a level of psychosocial support. So that's a term for friendship. People who listen to them, who show empathy. And so what I think, and this makes sense, is that when women have a core network of people who care for them as friends, who are there to support them through some of the harder parts of their leadership journey and life in general, then they're actually able to move into those relationships and that will support them in their leadership journey and step into some of those leadership opportunities. So where this goes from here, I have had one opportunity to speak to some women about this. I would love to do that a bit more. I'm trying. It's shaping my own way of approaching leadership, especially when I'm working with young women. And I would love to write a couple of articles, but I've just been taking a break since finishing that.
That's the way PhD works.
Yes.
Yeah, get tired. So it isn't like you don't see the leader in yourself until someone else does, but it's some kind of level of someone saying, "I see you,"
Yeah.
and I don't know that that's exclusive to women, but here's where we are today. You're saying that that's a really critical piece, is that someone could say, I see something in you that you may or may not see.
For sure. I think for both men and women, that is a process that happens, is that we will step into a leadership role, and then when it's affirmed for us, then we'll start to identify ourselves as leaders. It happens more readily for men because in our culture, we think male, we think leader, and so people will pretty quickly affirm men when they step into leadership roles if they're doing a good job. Like it's not a blank check. Whereas women, there's always this like, is she just taking too much charge here? There is a bit of a question mark. So having supportive relationships around them who are affirming them and like, yes, you actually are called to this, can help them continue that process.
I know one of the things that's near and dear to your heart is young adults and certainly young women. And so if there were young women listening to this podcast, what would you want to be saying to them? What are sort of the most important things you'd say, excuse me, most important things that you would say, maybe you wish someone had said to you in your 20s, or now that you've got a couple of different experiences under your belt, you'd say, here's something you women in your late teens, 20s should maybe hear.
Yeah, for sure. I would say a few things. One is that we women tend to undersell our capacity, and it limits us from even trying things. And so I would encourage you to try. Men have a lot more ability. They just have typically have a more innate sense of courage to step into tougher roles. And we don't carry that as easily all the time. And so step into these things, try them out. But then I think as part of that, make sure you are investing in close relationships who can support you in that, and call out the leadership gifts that they see in you and the other gifts that they see in you. So investing in strong friendships is one of the best things that we can do as leaders, especially as women, but I suspect it's true for men as well. The other thing to pay attention to for us as women is that our thoughts can change how we lead. And so when we start to think of ourselves as leaders, not in a pretentious way, but in a purposeful way, like this is an opportunity for me to make a difference, it will shape how we lead, and it can encourage us to step into some of these different challenges. So I'd encourage you to do that. If you're someone who's faith-based, Amy or Ewing. So if you're, I would say actually a Christian, because she's a Christian, Amy or Ewing, her voice is fantastic for women leaders. She's a super intelligent, thoughtful woman who has encountered her fair share of leadership challenges. And so I'd encourage you to listen to her or check out her books. She could be a great resource.
How about young men? We jointly lead this church, a man and woman. We hold it as a high priority to see the genders bless each other. We think that that's a biblical thing. We think that's the heart of God. But if you had a crack at some young men, and who are going to lead alongside young female leaders, what would you want to say to is there anything that you would say additionally?
I would encourage young men to invest in good friendships with women. I think that's so important when we're friends with one another. We start to appreciate each other's experience and learn from one another. And so just invest in really good friendships with women. I think, too, I've had a few conversations with young men and who have had questions about this, and I would encourage them to listen to women. Because of the dynamics between women and men, it can sometimes be very hard for women, and it may be the same for men, to voice concerns that they have with a man. And so if a woman is brave enough to come forward and say, I'm not sure about this behavior of yours, or these words of yours hurt, I would encourage you to listen rather than immediately defending, and just honor that. And I think that will help you to become someone who's more attentive to the experience of women. Women, we are not as strong as men physically, and so we are more vulnerable in many ways, and that is something you can only understand by listening to women. So I'd encourage that. The other thing I would say is show respect to women when you're with them and when you're just with men. And I think I would say the same thing to women. I've been in conversations with groups of women, and it can so quickly turn to devaluing men. And that's so not helpful, because that will bleed into our relationships with one another. I have heard stories that the same thing can happen when a group of guys get together. And so I just encourage you, just don't do that. Don't go there, but continue to value the women in your lives, even when you're just with men. And then one last thing for Christian organizations, that we have had an approach in the past. There's less of it now, but it was called the Billy Graham rule or the Mike Pence rule. And this was where a rule that men would establish for themselves. They would never be alone in a room with a woman. And first of all, I want to honor that. Like I so value the intentionality and the high regard for being respectful towards women and honoring marriages. That's so important. The challenge with that rule is that when men said that they would never meet alone with women, they would meet alone with other men. And so, or they'd go out with the guys. And so women, and that's where all of the good conversations happen. And that's where all of the decision making really happened. And so because of that rule, women just got cut out of a lot of leadership opportunities. And so you need to figure out your way of interacting with women. But I would just say if you have no meetings alone with women, then just make it the same for no meetings alone with men, and bring men and women together for your meetings, or figure out another way to do that. But that rule has actually been pretty detrimental to women in the church and in Christian organizations to becoming leaders.
That raises a couple of questions.
Yeah.
Right, like what are the pitfalls, and then how do we be careful? Because, the timestamp of this particular podcast, there's a Coldplay incident where a CEO and someone head of HR sort of got busted at a concert, and think, okay, so how do we be careful? How do we be able to celebrate all the good things, and then be mindful that, strong people have tumbled in the past?
Absolutely. I wonder if it doesn't also come back to these networks that we have around us. I know that for myself, I am far more aware of my behavior, and more conscious of being careful, and I'm just less likely to sin when I'm in regular conversations with good friends, and I know they're asking me about it. So I think having these networks where we're confessing sin to one another, and we're talking about areas where we're tempted or where we're confused across the board, I think that's probably one of our best safeguards for that. What would you say to that, though? I don't think policies are important, and I love them. I'm an organizational leadership person, but they're not actually the answer.
Sure. If I want to get around it, I'll get around it.
Any policy can help.
So if I know at the get-go, that I want to be faithful to my wife, that I want my marriage to be, and every marriage to be safeguarded, and that sort of be its own protected place, and I want to work with you to lead a church. So, there's just that clarity is helpful. And the conversations with somebody, you have them with your friends, other colleagues, I have them with mine. Here's what's going on. Here's where, ask me any question. Yeah. And make sure that my heart is accountable at some level. Yeah, that's good. Hey, we have at least 2 fans who proposed some questions for you. How does it, and so let's just go back, not back, but let's move it a little bit different angle. How does a young woman know if she's called to leadership, and how does she then test that out or pursue that? What's like if you happen to be, just entering into university for your first year, and university is this wide open multitude of opportunities for leadership, Christian campuses, but even on your own floor. Anyway, how do you know if that's what language God has called you to, or God's gifted you with, and then what's your steps?
Right. So we never lead in a vacuum, right? It's always we're leading because of a certain situation, and for women especially, purpose is a key part of that. We're leading for a purpose, and so I would say that we start to realize that we're leaders as we find ourselves in these situations where we're being called in to look after things, take charge of things, create influence. For me, all of my leadership roles just sort of happened to me. And I don't know if it was maybe only 5-6 years ago that I started to feel okay saying, okay, I am a leader. But it was just, it's not like I set out saying, I'm going to be a leader. These things will happen to us. And as people affirm this and say, yes, I see this in you. But I don't know if I would necessarily go after leadership. Go after causes and purposes that matter, and bring your full self to it. And then I think that the leadership gifting will grow out of that. And then as that does, we have the opportunity and the responsibility to develop that, to learn the self-awareness that is so important for being a good leader, to learn things like how to hold a meeting, how to communicate well. These are just all good skills to grow in. That's where I would start. Is it any different for men?
I don't know. I think you're right. Like these things, anyone that's pursuing leadership makes me nervous. I break into a bit of a hive.
Yeah.
Because it seems like maybe more identities attached
Yeah.
to this than. So I agree with you. Find things that you're passionate about, and then kind of watch the room. Presumably, some people aren't leaders.
Yeah.
And that's
Different
okay
situations.
too.
Yeah, for sure.
And in fact, maybe there's times when you or me, like I lead many things, and then sometimes I'm not actually the leader in this particular situation, and that's okay too. So sometimes it happens that you're in a moment, you're in a place, there's needed, and then you start to shine, and something goes well. And then I also feel like at some point maybe I'm going to hand this back.
Yes.
And it's been a thrill and a privilege, and I'm grateful. And what would you say? So now this is a little, unfortunately, Christian Bible church based. What would you say a young woman should say to someone, whether it's a man or actually another woman, says, "You're a woman, you can't lead." How do you counsel that? Because there's a history here.
That is a super tough one, and I would respond differently depending on different situations. So, I mean, you and I were talking about this earlier, and you had a very good response there. It does depend on who is saying this to you. If it's someone who has little to no influence on your life, and it's just kind of someone in passing, I would just probably ignore. And move away from the conversation. And sometimes that is really our best option, is to move away from the conversation, potentially even move out of an organization if that's what's being said. There are some times, and I'm finding it more and more now as I get older, as you reminded me at the beginning.
It wasn't an age thing.
I'm kidding.
It was just about
totally
you've been a woman all of your life.
But as I get older, and I do have more leadership experience, there are times when I realize if I don't sort of address this, it's going to be a lot harder for the younger women who are around me or sort of behind me. And so there are times when it is important to find a way to address it in a way that is gentle and respectful and loving, but we actually can't let it slide. One of the barriers to women in leadership is women themselves. We acquiesce, we self-silence, we become compliant. And so there are times when we need to hold our ground and if possible, bring in one of your network friends, probably a male, who can also start to speak for you, like my CEO did for me so many years ago. That's just a great way to approach that.
Good. So what do you do with the parts of the Bible that seem to be quite explicitly saying that women should be silent? How do you navigate those?
Great question. I think that you will need to know those passages and find some good resources that help you walk through them. I have studied them and am really comfortable with understanding how there are only about 2 or 3 that they're very culturally specific, and understanding the nuances around them. When we look at the whole arc of the Bible and the way men and women were created and our redemption story and how Jesus interacted with men and women, I think that we are on good ground looking at the cultural specifics of those texts. So I would say do the research. One of the resources that I have found so helpful just came out in the last, I think, 2 years, Bridgetown Church. They did a whole teaching series, and then they created a document to explain their position on women in leadership. It was so thoughtful, so well done, very comprehensive, and it's not too long of a read, or just listen to their podcast. So that I would actually say that's a great resource to become familiar with how we approach these different parts of the Bible. But but you will need to be able to respond to some of those.
Yeah. And we're Christians first. And so woman or man,
Yes.
we're never actually in a position to force our way towards anything. I agree with you. Sometimes you have to change organizations. Even we've seen people change churches. And it's just that we want to make sure that we're attuned to the Holy Spirit. What the Holy Spirit's done in gifting women and men, that was always the plan. That was the plan in Joel. It was planned when Deborah was judge. It was planned, I think about Priscilla and Aquila, who had leadership, and were often named that way.
That's
Priscilla
right.
and Aquila. And so it does feel like she was the lead player, even in that marriage and that teaching team. So I think that's good. Anything final that you want to say on this?
It's been a good conversation, and I think I would say that our working relationship, I think, has been a really great example of how men and women can work together and encourage one another and allow our giftings to flourish. We're pretty different, and I think we value that and we call that out in one another. And so I think that I've had several relationships like that, collegial relationships like that, but it just is so encouraging to actually see examples like that. So I would maybe leave us there.
Great. Hey, we're really pleased that you tuned in. Hopefully you made it all the way to the end of the podcast. Hopefully this sparks conversations, and we're always interested in having a conversation with you as well. So you are able to reach out either to Lenita at stpauls.ca, Andrew at stpauls.ca. We love to make a connection. Till next time, God bless.